The Bay of Bengal exhales, a slow, warm, salt-heavy breath that rolls up the sand in the dark and slides back without urgency, pulling small shells and foam with it, leaving a faint hiss, like air escaping a closed room. The air sits thick and humid, tasting of brine and diesel and something sweeter underneath. The faintly herbal smell of wet sand baking under a city that never fully cools. Behind the beach, Chennai glows in sodium orange and LED white. The East Coast Road murmurs with late traffic. An auto rickshaw coughs past a row of closed shops. A dog barks in a nearby neighborhood and sets off a chain of answering voices that runs along the houses, and the shore belongs burning south briefly to a different clock. Out beyond the low surf, an old, dark shape lifts on a swell. Small, round-backed, unhurried. An olive Ridley, barely 70 centimeters, a little more than 2 feet across the shell. Her carapace slick and dark as wet stone. She rides the wave in with a patience that looks practiced, because it is. Not by her, but by 100 million years of her kind reading the orbital pull of water against their inner ear. Sensing the magnetic gradient of this coastline like a faint hum in the skull. Tasting the chemical signature of this particular stretch of shore. When the wave releases her, gravity arrives all at once. Flippers that carved clean arcs through salt water now scrape and drag against dry sand, hauling her body forward in slow, heavy strokes that leave paired grooves in the beach like tractor treads. Her eyes, designed for the bright, shade-free surface of the open ocean, turned to blues and greens and near ultraviolet wavelengths that humans cannot see, are poor in air, nearsighted, overwhelmed by the sodium glare spilling over the low seawall. With her blurry sight out of her element, she sees something that makes her pause. The brightest horizon should be the sea behind her, stars and moonlight scattered across water. Tonight, it is the road. She pushes on anyway, past footprints and dog tracks, past the crescent scars where someone has scraped out a cartload of sand for construction, past the faint, oily residue of an evening cricket game's boundary rope. The soft parts of her flippers register every texture: dry grains, a twist of fishing line, the hard edge of a buried bottle cap. Somewhere far inland, a stadium light clicks off. The tide keeps sliding in and out, and her body keeps answering to its own, older tide. This is the familiar tension of Chennai's coast. A wild animal performing an act older than any city on Earth. On a strip of sand that doubles as a backyard, playground, dump site, and storm buffer for more than 10 million people. For the turtle, the world is simpler. Find darkness above the highest tide line. Dig, lay, cover, turn, and go. If the sand is soft enough, and the dogs stay far enough, she will leave behind a clutch of roughly 100 eggs in a flask-shaped chamber sculpted by her rear flippers alone. After she's done, Her body beats the sand down with her underside because she is too small and light to pack it with flippers the way larger turtles do. If not, she will haul herself back to the surf and try again, somewhere else, following cues in temperature, magnetism, and the chemical memory of this coastline that her species has carried for longer than the Himalayas have been tall. I'm David Maroney, and you're listening to the Wild Systems Podcast. Each week, we look at a conservation effort from somewhere around the world. We dive into the ecosystem and uncover the systems that drive it to endure in a changing world. We look at how conservationists are putting their finger on the scale to influence those systems, and the true data behind whether that effort is succeeding. I want to ask, why do conservation efforts succeed or fail? How is the wilderness there being impacted? And how would the effort look from the perspective of those wild creatures we're trying to protect and preserve? Today, we're walking a shoreline that is anything but remote. We're following olive Ridley sea turtles onto the beaches of Chennai, India's fourth largest city, to understand what happens when a wild, migratory reptile stakes its future on an urban coast. It's a story about sand, light, nets, and the people working to shift the balance, and about a creature whose senses were shaped by 100 million years of open ocean, now reading a coastline remade by 10 million people. We'll follow a nesting female and a fisherman, and we'll ask about what wildness looks like when it refuses to leave, even after we've paved over the dark. Picture a map of southern India, the peninsula leaning slightly southeast into the vast Indian Ocean. Along the right eastern side, the Coromandel coast runs relatively straight, a long arc of barrier beaches, low dunes, and shallow near-shore bars that take the force out of incoming waves and release it as a slow, flat surf. The water here is warm year-round, thickened with sediment carried down from rivers, tinted green-brown with the plankton and suspended silt that feed an enormous web of life just beneath the surface. When a monsoon has recently passed, the near shore turns almost opaque, and the smell of the water changes, fresher, more mineral, laced with the runoff of a city built on a lattice of seasonal lakes and marshes. For a turtle approaching from the open bay, this coastline announces itself long before it comes into view. The water shallows gradually. The sound of waves hitting the sand shifts in pitch, felt more than heard, through her skull and jaw as low-frequency vibrations below 400 hertz, the range where sea turtle hearing is sharpest. A world of deep, slow pulses that carry far underwater. The magnetic field of the Earth tilts and strengthens in a pattern unique to this latitude, a signature her brain imprinted the moment she first crawled into the ocean as a hatchling decades ago. And the water itself tells a chemical story. She draws it through her nostrils and flushes it out through her mouth in rhythmic motions, reading the dissolved minerals, the runoff, the organic scent of specific sand and vegetation, the way a sommelier reads a glass of wine. Over evolutionary time, all of Ridleys have wired these cues together into a map. Gently sloping beaches, warm enough for embryos, but not so hot that nests cook. Close enough to the sea that hatchlings, once they dig free of the sand after days of synchronized, collaborative effort with their siblings, can reach the water before crabs and crows find them. Along the Tamil Nadu coast, that kind of beach used to stretch almost uninterrupted. From Pulicat Lagoon in the north, past what is now Chennai, and down toward Cuddalore and beyond, a distance of 150 miles, low dunes ran parallel to the sea, stitched together by salt-tolerant grasses and scrub that held the sand in place. Behind them lay brackish waters, patches of mangrove, dark, tannin-stained, heavy with the smell of wet roots and slow tidal exchange. And then paddy fields, villages, and the ancient lakes that gave Chennai its original network of irrigation and flood control. In front lay a wide intertidal zone where waves broke softly and spent themselves before reaching the dune toe, leaving a margin of damp, firm sand that cooled quickly after sunset and warmed slowly at dawn. Nights here during the nesting season, December through March, used to be muggy and dark. The sky held only stars, the glow of fishing boat lanterns far offshore, and during festivals, the flare of occasional fires. The sand, unlit by anything but the moon, held its heat in the top few centimeters and cooled deeper down, creating a thermal gradient that influenced embryonic development, and, through it, the sex of every hatchling in a clutch. Warmer nests tilting the ratio towards females, cooler ones toward males. Olive Ridleys are not the only creatures who read this system. Ghost crabs build small chimneys at the high tide line, emerging at night to scavenge. Shorebirds trace the retreating foam in frantic, precise runs, probing for buried invertebrates. Fish use the nearshore bars as nurseries, tiny juveniles riding the wash in and out, sheltered by the cloudy water from larger predators. For coastal communities, these same beaches have long been working spaces, places to land boats, dry nets, sort catch, and mend gear. The dunes and coastal scrub, though rarely named in any official document, formed a living seawall, absorbing the cyclone surges that roll in off the Bay of Bengal every few years and spend their energy before it reaches the villages beyond. A nesting turtle is shaped by all of this. Her body temperature reflects the water she swims through. Her reproductive timing follows the seasons. Her choice of nesting site is a bet that enough of those old cues, darkness, slope, sand, texture, the magnetic whisper of this latitude, still line up with whatever she finds when she drags herself ashore. And for a very long time, they did. We can imagine the 1970s as a fork in the fate of this coastline. As that decade opened, the ecosystem still functioned more or less as it had for millennia. The beaches could have continued their slow seasonal rhythm. erosion in one monsoon, or its reverse, accretion in the next. Dunes advancing and retreating, but never disappearing. Olive Ridleys could have kept arriving in their unpredictable numbers, laying where darkness and sand texture told them to lay. Hatchlings finding the sea by starlight. But that's not what happened. The expansion of mechanized fishing was the first push that sent this system hurtling toward a different future. Trawlers began working closer to the shore. Drift nets and bottom set nets spread in number and in length, strung through the same shallow waters where olive ridleys feed and surface to breathe. A turtle that hits a net can tangle a flipper or neck in seconds. Unless someone finds her fast and cuts her free, she drowns, silently, in water too cloudy to see her struggle. Off Odisha to the north of Chennai, where thousands of turtles nest together in mass events, the mortality became impossible to ignore. Dead animals washing ashore by the hundreds some years, wrapped in netting or sliced by boat propellers. Along the Chennai coast, where nesting is scattered and smaller, the losses stayed quieter. But surveys through the 1990s and 2000s still found carcasses along hundreds of kilometers of shoreline, flippers torn, limbs missing, the clear marks of nets and boats. Underwater, a turtle meets a drift net the way you might meet a spider's web in a dark hallway, sudden, invisible, and the more you struggle, the worse it gets. Her flippers, sensitive on their soft undersides, register the filament instantly, but her instinct says, push forward, not retreat. The net tightens. She rolls, and it wraps tighter. Her lungs, already working on borrowed time between breaths, begin to burn. On land, the beach itself changed. Chennai grew outward from its old colonial core, and demand for cheap construction material turned sand into currency. Trucks and handcarts removed it from dunes and upper beaches, sometimes with permits, often not, to raise building sites and fill low ground. Each load seemed small, but over years, the dune buffer thinned. Vegetation disappeared. Low points opened where storm waves could cut deeper. Erosion accelerated near river mouths and seawalls, where engineered structures altered the way sediment moved along the coast. As the city expanded, so did its light. Street lamps, neon signs, high mast lights at intersections, decorative strips along waterfront promenades. All of it bleeding into what had been unbroken dark. For a nesting female, landward brightness can end an attempt before it starts. She may crawl up the beach, reach the edge of the glow, circle once and drag herself back to the water without laying. For hatchlings, the problem is sharper. A newly emerged olive ridley crawls toward the brightest horizon. On an undeveloped coast, that's the ocean. Moonlight and starlight scattered across water in the near ultraviolet wavelengths her eyes are built to see. On a Chennai beach with street lamps, the brightest horizon is inland. Disoriented hatchlings head towards roads, drains, and yards, where heat, vehicles, or dogs finish what the light started. And dogs are everywhere. Feral packs, semi-owned strays, pets loose after dark, all patrolling the beach. A buried nest, to a dog, is a puzzle that smells like food. One animal can dig out an entire clutch in minutes, cracking every egg and erasing a female's single chance that year. None of these changes targeted turtles. They were side effects of other needs: protein from the sea, sand for construction, safety after dark, the growth of a port city whose identity points inland, even as its shoreline stretches along one of the longest urban beaches in the world. Words like development make it sound gradual and polite. On the ground, it was direct. Dunes scraped away, bucket by bucket. Nets laid across migration corridors. Lights spread over darkness like a second skin. By the early 2000s, naturalists walking a 7-kilometer stretch of beach south of the city center at night were finding enough dead adults, raided nests, and disoriented hatchlings to know the balance had tipped. Those night walks would soon become something more organized, more determined, the beginning of an effort to push back. Our turtle, the one who hauled herself up the beach past cricket game residue and construction scars, faces odds that have shifted sharply against her. She's overcome the odds and headed back into the nearshore feeding grounds. For the next clutch she lays, and every clutch afterwards, she faces dogs, confusing lights, and sand that may flood or erode before incubation finishes. But for now, as she feeds, every time she surfaces to breathe, she must only navigate the lattice of nets. 40 kilometers south, a fisherman pulls in his net at dawn. Conservation on these beaches didn't arrive as policy or funding. It started as mere footsteps, small groups walking the sand at night during nesting season, learning to read the paired grooves of a nesting crawl. By the late 1980s, students and naturalists in Chennai had formed what would become the Students' Sea Turtle Conservation Network. Their method was simple: patrol stretches of beach between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., find fresh nests, find the vulnerable ones, those too close to the tide line, under streetlights or near known dog routes, and move them to protected hatcheries before the egg's outer membrane hardened. The hatcheries themselves are low-tech, fenced sandy plots above the high tide mark, where each relocated clutch gets reburied at similar depth, marked with a date and a nest number. Volunteers monitor around the clock. When hatchlings emerge after 45 to 60 days, they're carried to dark stretches of beach after sunset and released at the water's edge, where they read the orbital pull of waves through their inner ears and crawl towards the sea. Over nearly 4 decades, this network has released several 100,000 hatchlings that would otherwise have been lost. Public awareness walks on weekends pull city residents onto night patrols, teaching them to see the beach as a habitat. School groups visit the hatchery. Media coverage each season reinforces the message. These animals nest here, and the coast is theirs too. But ensuring more turtles are born and make it to the sea is just part of the solution. Something needed to be done about the adults that kept getting killed. Olive Ridleys gained finalized protection under India's Wildlife Act in 1991. But the sea and the shoreline still didn't feel protected. As carcasses kept washing ashore and bycatch estimates mounted, scientists and conservation groups began to show that these deaths were not random bad luck, but a direct result of denser trawl and gillnet effort along the east coast. Beach monitoring data linked spikes in turtle strandings to specific seasons and gear types, while rudimentary monitoring showed that thousands of olive ridleys were likely dying each year in Indian fisheries, especially near major nesting areas. The only monitoring implemented at this time was offshore bycatch studies, so the only numbers of deaths we knew about were those reported by fishing vessels themselves. Those numbers fed into reports and court petitions, arguing that if India wanted its Wildlife Act and coastal policies to mean anything for turtles, it needed concrete rules on where and how boats could fish. That pressure translated into a mix of legal and management steps. By this time, killing or trading these turtles was already illegal. Formal no-go belts along sensitive coasts were created, and fishers were notified of the so-called coastal regulation zones. But enforcing those policies was another thing. Enforcement lagged significantly. Courts occasionally used mass mortality events to push state agencies to enforce more strictly, ordering action against illegal trawlers or unregulated sand removal. By the 2000s, offshore bycatch study reported killings were able to show only measly decreases. Finally, in 2025, the Indian government mandated that all fishing nets must include turtle excluder devices, which are little grates that allow turtles to escape while smaller fish and shrimp are still caught. In the same year, the government also implemented seasonal fishing bans, or no-trawl zones, around key river mouths and rookery areas, such as 7-month closures off the turtles' favorite beaches. Monitoring and enforcement have been uneven, but they matter. Long-term nesting counts and strandings data, pulled together in national turtle action plans and multi-year monitoring reports, show that in places where seasonal bans, TED use, and beach protection are reasonably applied, especially in Odisha, olive ridley nesting has stabilized or even rebounded, with recent seasons recording on the order of 1 million nests at some rookeries. At the same time, recent strandings of hundreds of turtles near Chennai, apparently drowned in illegal trawl nets, underline how fragile those gains are when rules stay on paper or patrols slip. Over the past 15 to 20 years, India has built up a clearer picture of what all this adds up to. Long-term beach monitoring, coordinated by Dakshin Foundation and state forest departments, has tracked nesting at 2 sites, where counts have risen from roughly 25 to 50,000 nests a season in the early 2000s to over 150,000 nests in the past decade, with some years estimating more than 400,000 nesting turtles. Those numbers come up from simple but sustained methods. Nightly patrols during nesting season to record every crawl and nest, follow-up checks to see how many hatchlings emerge, and standardized data sheets that allow researchers to compare 1 year to the next across 16 years and multiple beaches. For Chennai specifically, reports from mid-February 2026 say the city's beaches have already crossed 100 olive ridley nests in just 40 days, the fastest pace recorded there in 3 decades. At the same time, this season's early optimism is tempered by reminders of risk. One of the radio-tagged turtles washed ashore dead in a fishing net, and fresh field evidence shows mechanized trawlers still operating in restricted nearshore waters, keeping enforcement and bycatch reduction very much live issues rather than solved ones. Before dawn, 40 kilometers south of the city center, a small fiberglass boat noses back toward shore. The fisherman is second generation. His village, once countryside, is now part of the city's sprawl. He and his crew pull in the last stretch of gill net, hand over hand, wet mesh piling in the bow, with the metallic smell of fish and salt. Then the net goes tight. Something larger thrashes below the surface. The boat rocks. Olive Ridleys feed in these same shallows during nesting season, eating jellyfish, crabs, shrimp, surfacing to breathe in water threaded with nets that are, to their blurry above-water vision, invisible. The fisherman curses, signals the engine to idle, leans over. A dark carapace breaks the surface, one flipper twisted in mesh. They work fast, cutting strands, steadying her head so she doesn't thrash harder. No lecture about law. The next steps are obvious. A dead turtle is bad luck, bad for the net, bad with authorities. A live one slipping free means less damage, less trouble. They roll her clear. She lies alongside the hull, exhausted, those wide dark eyes, built for bright open ocean, sensitive to ultraviolet wavelengths humans can't see, blinking slowly in the dim air. Then, with a few strokes, she's gone into the murky green. Behind her, torn nylon, the crew will spend an hour fixing. The fisherman sighs. The net is income, the turtle regulation. The sea is his workplace, with more and more rules. One of those rules, requiring turtle exclusion devices in nets, was in this case not followed, and our turtle paid a small price, luckily not the ultimate one, for this small fisherman cost avoidance. And this fisherman isn't the only one. Bycatch studies estimate thousands of olive ridleys die annually along India's east coast in trawl and gill net fisheries. I feel that bycatch is a funny word for this. It shows up often in reports, but what is it really? It's an animal being hauled up on a small boat, gasping, while 3 people work knives through nylon in half light. It's the brutal maiming of an ancient wonder, a sea turtle having evolved 100 million years ago by a crude upstart, a human, evolved only 300,000 years ago, and only in the last few hundred years deciding that not only do we want to dominate the whole world, we also can't leave any room for other creatures. So how can we judge whether or not conservation of the olive ridleys in the Bay of Bengal is working? On land, the signs are visible in the sand. Night patrols and hatcheries have turned what used to be scattered, unrecorded nests into something more like a season with a countable pulse. Across Tamil Nadu, recent seasons have seen hundreds of thousands of eggs protected and tens of thousands of hatchlings released that would almost certainly have been lost to dogs, flooding, or sand theft. In Chennai itself, this year's nesting has already crossed 100 nests in just over a month, the quickest start anyone has recorded in decades. At the same time, the sand is still cut by tire tracks and beach cleaning machines. Glow from new buildings still pours across the dunes, and every new construction project at the edge of the beach is a fresh question mark over where the next generation will lay. Zoom out, and the picture gets more mixed. Long-term monitoring at major breeding grounds further up the coast shows that where protection is consistent, seasonal fishing bans, serious crackdowns on illegal trawling near shore, and beaches kept dark and open, olive ridley nesting has stabilized or even grown. In those places, counts now run to hundreds of thousands of nests in a good year. But those gains are fragile. A single bad season of lax enforcement can mean hundreds or thousands of dead adults washing ashore, each one representing decades of survival lost in one tangle with a net. The East Coast as a whole looks healthier than it did 30 years ago. But there still is no India-wide census clean enough to say the population is firmly in the clear. What makes this story different from many we tell is how close it sits to everyday life. This is not a remote breeding ground visited only by scientists. It's a working urban shoreline where fishers launch boats between food stalls, joggers pass hatchery fences on morning runs, and sea turtles climb out of the Bay of Bengal within sight of apartment towers and traffic lights. Here, success cannot mean turning back the city or freezing the coast in some earlier state. It means keeping enough of the old cues, dark horizons, soft dunes, breathable water free of wall-to-wall nets, in play, that a reptile whose lineage predates our species by tens of millions of years can still complete its loop from sea to sand and back again. Some nights, that balance feels almost within reach. A well-run hatchery, a quiet, unlit stretch of beach, a patrol boat that actually turns trawlers away from the shallows. Other nights, it collapses into contradiction. A record number of nests, and in the same season, a tagged turtle washing ashore dead. For now, conservation on this coast lives in that tension. The work goes on. One clutch, one patrol, one enforcement order, one hatchling sprint, and the ending is still being written. stand on a Chennai beach at 2 in the morning, somewhere between the bright clusters of shuttered restaurants and the long, shadowed reaches of vacant lots. And for a few breaths, the city disappears. The sky is hazy but wide. The surf rolls on its own schedule. Wind pushes grains of sand in small, restless ripples around your bare feet. Then a late train horn blows, or a plane drags its lights across the horizon, and the illusion folds. You are standing in a metropolis, and the dark strip you're standing on is a seam, a border, a place where two systems press against each other, and neither one quite wins. So where can wildness persist in this place, if it can at all? And if it can, what does wildness look like for an Olive Ridley? It is definitely not the absence of people, not on the edge of a city with 10 million of them. Maybe it's a way of moving through a world that still answers, at least partially, to cues she evolved long before any human language existed. The tilt of the Earth's magnetic field at this latitude, the chemical taste of this particular water on her palate, the texture of this sand under the soft skin of her flippers, the orbital rhythm of waves felt through the bones of her skull. Her sensory world is almost entirely alien to ours. She hears frequencies we ignore, sees ultraviolet light we cannot perceive, navigates by a magnetic map we can only detect with instruments. When she hauls herself up a beach at midnight, she's not visiting our world. She is running a program written across geological time in a language of magnetism, chemistry, and vibration that the city around her does not speak and cannot overwrite. We are starting to intervene in the most vulnerable moments of that program. We pick up eggs, fence off sand, shade hatcheries, carry hatchlings to the waterline. We prescribe angles for lights and distances for boats. So, on one side, we have a species whose reproduction depends on human calendars, government apps, and policy clauses. But on the other side, the turtle's mind has not changed to fit the city. She has no concept of a coastal regulation zone or a turtle excluder device. She knows only that some parts of the beach feel wrong, too bright, too hard, too loud, and others, for now, still feel right enough to risk the weight of her body on the slope. So I think you could argue that, while these turtles can still find a beach at the end of their map of chemistry and magnetism, and that beach can still offer her a sanctuary to perform the ancient rite of laying her hatch in the way her species always has. And as long as those hatchlings still make it in numbers to the frothing sea, the turtle remains wild. But what of the ecosystem? There's a reason this Bay of Bengal ecosystem has been a key natural resource for India. It's a highly productive system, producing butterfish and prawns in such abundance that human communities have always been drawn to its edge. The same plankton-rich waters that feed those fisheries also fatten jellyfish and crabs for turtles, and the same sandbars that soften waves for boat landings create the quiet, gently sloping beaches a nesting female needs. When that system still has room for these non-human needs, for sand to shift with storms instead of being locked in concrete, for a strip of darkness between the last streetlight and the sea, then wildness isn't gone, it's compressed. It lives in the narrow overlap between a city's demands and a turtle's map, in the small but real space where both can still, for now, do what they evolved or learned to do. Near the end of the nesting season, the beach looks different again. New tire tracks cross where earlier sand mining scars have partially filled with wind-blown grains. Storm debris marks where waves licked higher than anyone expected. Inland, an under-construction building has added another floor and another bank of lights that will glow through the coming monsoon and every nesting season after. One evening, another dark shape rises from the surf where no one is watching. This female hauls herself past a line of plastic debris, past the imprint of last weekend's volleyball court, and begins to dig. Her rear flippers scoop and sculpt a flask-shaped chamber with the same careful, deliberate motions her ancestors used on a quieter version of this coast, alternating left and right, feeling the moisture and give of the sand with every stroke, dropping her eggs, then beating the surface down with her whole body. She does not know whether this nest will be found by a dog or relocated by conservation workers, whether the tide will reach it or the temperature will be what it needs to be. She only knows that the sand here, tonight, answered enough of the questions her body carries to make the attempt worth the wait. Offshore, fishermen set nets again, making their own calculations about fuel, weather, debt, and rules that shift with the politics. Some nights, they haul up nets empty of turtles and full of fish. Some nights, they cut another flipper free. Somewhere in a government office, one of the 10 million city residents revises a coastal plan that could significantly decompress this ecosystem, leaving room for more ancient wildness to creep in. As long as all of Ridleys exist, they may keep coming here to lay their eggs. The city will keep growing, reworking its edge in concrete and glass and sand. The conservation workers will keep walking at night, counting nests, carrying eggs, arguing in meetings about lighting codes and setback distances. At least that's our hope. Somewhere in that set of overlapping motions, the sweep of a flipper, the cut of a net, the stroke of a planner's pen, lies the future of all of Ridley's on this shore. It's not settled. It may never be. But on any given night in nesting season, if you stand long enough at the water's edge and watch the space between the waves and the lights, you may see a shell rise out of the dark surf, pause, and choose, once more, to risk the shore. To close today's episode, I want to borrow a passage from Rabindranath Tagore, a poet of the Bay of Bengal, whose lines about the meaning of life and water feel at home on this coast. As you listen, imagine our turtle already back in the open sea, her magnetic compass pulling her north or south along a corridor she can't explain but has never forgotten. The same stream of life that runs through my veins night and day runs through the world and dances in rhythmic measures. It is the same life that shoots in joy through the dust of the earth in numberless blades of grass and breaks into tumultuous waves of leaves and flowers. It is the same life that is rocked in the ocean cradle of birth and of death, in ebb and in flow. I feel my limbs are made glorious by the touch of this world of life, and my pride is from the life throb of ages dancing in my blood. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wild Systems podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a comment. If you want to read the article for this episode, go to the Ecological Resilience Project's website. To engage further with the team who produces the Wild Systems podcast, head over to our website and submit a contact form. Stop by next week as we wade into another investigation of what it means to be wild and what it costs to stay that way.